Okay. Welcome.
I'm Gilbert Knight. I'm from the mobility group at Target.
I'm Saranya from mobility group at Target, and Xamarin Mobiles, trying to figure out things and do some fun stuff.
Rick Rayner. So during the day I'm at Blue Cross Blue Shield doing C#. And then at night I follow Guy Fieri and Diners, Drive to Dives. So I have an app called Flavortown USA, and it's built an accelerator, and I'm moving it to Xamarin.
Yay!
Yeah, the problem I'm running into just now, just if anybody is running into this, I'm just trying to get a social login through my web API too. And not quite working as well as I'd like, so if anybody's run into that, let me know. So, but yeah, Accelerator's been good. It's JavaScript based, but now that this is free, I mean, I got $50 back first of all, which is nice. And I'm just gonna move it over.
Great.
Here. I'm Brett Feinweber. I lead the application development practice for OST. We're a consulting firm. We do a lot of full stack web and mobile development, including with Xamarin. One of our recent Xamarin projects was we built a snow emergency notification app for the city of St. Paul. It's out in Google and Apple App Stores right now. So check that out if you're interested in living in St. Paul. Tell you where to park and where not to park.
I'm Jacobus Tedros. I'm an independent consultant. I'm a full stack .NET developer.
My name is Jason Ernall. I'm with a company called ILM Professional Services. We do some consulting around the area. Our consultants have built apps for Dow Jones, Wall Street Journal bears. We're currently building an app for a healthcare startup, all in Xamarin. So we're excited to be doing that. A couple other things. We have a principal going down to the Evolve conference, which I'll be sure to get you my cards so that maybe you can hook up with Joel while he's down there. So,
Hi, I'm James Barker. I work at Zebra Technologies, mobile developer there. Our primary software that we work on is something called iFactor, which is built on top of Mono. Kind of works similar to Xamarin.Forms. That's what I've been focused on lately. I also have an app in the App Store for a game called Destiny that's built using Xamarin.Forms.
Tom Soderling, recently joined Mobile Composer about 3 weeks ago. Been a mobile developer for about 3 years, and a .NET developer before that. I'm the author of the infamous app, How Deep Is It? You can check it out if you have an old iPhone that you're client destroying. Really excited about Xamarin.Forms. We're going to evolve this year just to learn more. Using it on a product right now at Mobile Composer.
I'm more on the side.
I'm Gary Myers. I'm working right now, but I've been using Xamarin for 3 years. And I'm looking, ideally, I'm working on releasing my app this year, but I'll be open to anybody that's looking to hire people.
Stephen Tremblay, .NET developer at Graco over in Northeast Minneapolis here.
That's right.
And I have built a couple internal apps for the company, but nothing into the App Store. That's terrifying. And but love the platform, and I am going to evolve as well for the training too. So if anybody's going to training, like to hook up with them or something, so I know somebody there.
Thank you. I'm Steve Killenbeck. Adam and I started this group about 3 years ago, and then here we are today. I am a certified Xamarin developer, also a freelancer. Do a lot of work with Adam. I think that's a good thing. And we'll leave it to John here.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I think it's my first full presentation at this user group. I did a couple other shared presentations, namely with the the Xamarin 4 thing earlier this year, and then I did the last Evolve conference recap. Okay, so first time too, so bear with me. I'm going to try to make certain that y'all can hear me, that I'm giving you some good stuff. Basically, just to show of hands, how many people are certified developers in Xamarin? Okay. How many people have enough experience that they'd probably be certified if you took the test? Okay, yeah, everyone else can raise their hand, that's fine too. And a bunch of people who are brand new. Okay, good, that's a good mix overall. One of the approaches that we want to talk about today, well here let me talk, is that I want to make sure that I gave a broad scope of the topic of MVVM in Xamarin.Forms. So if I go too slow, raise your hand and say, yep, we got this. If I gloss over something that I think is blatantly obvious to me, and you've got this little big question mark in your head, like, what did John just say? Please, by all means, raise your hand, ask a question, make a comment. I think that makes that more enjoyable and more valuable for everybody when you do that. I'm certainly not going to be offended if someone says, hey, would you go back to that slide and go do that again? Because we've got a short amount of time and kind of a lot to go through, so I'll probably go at a pretty good pace, but slow me down if you need to. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm a certified mobile application developer in Xamarin. I'd say specialized in Xamarin apps for nearly 6 years. And that's, as you know, predates Xamarin, which is only a little over 4 years old. The technology Xamarin uses predates the company, and that's when I started, way back when. Worked with many cross-platform frameworks. FreshMVVM, the one we'll be talking about tonight. A couple of enterprise apps with MVVM Cross. Worked with Xamarin.Forms, and I also worked with iFactor and MonoCross. Was one of the original developers on the data stack and some of the other pieces there. So we got a few iFactor alumni running around here, so we're good to go. And then I was also, put at the bottom, co-author of the cross-platform book on MonoCross. It's one of those things we wrote a book, and MVVM Cross kind of took off and MonoCross did, so we're good to go, which is all right. So the overview of what we want to talk about, I got 3 main areas that we're going to focus on and work with. And the first one is, I just want to talk about the MVVM pattern at a high level. Second, I want to talk about how Xamarin.Forms, implements MVVM. They have a class in their Xamarin University that shows how they do that. I'm going to try to replicate that a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about, specifically, an extra framework for MVVM in Xamarin.Forms called FreshMVVM. And those are the 3 things we've got. And again, if anything isn't clear, if you have questions, please, please, please jump in and ask. Okay, so they always say start off with a demo, so here I am. Let's see if I can get this going through nicely. Here are the displays.
It's 7 o'clock.
Try. Thank you. Oh, it's 7 o'clock, good to know. Okay, so what I've got to show is I'm not going to do any live coding tonight. It's one of those things where it's always takes longer than you think to do something live. You never get as far as you want to. Plus, what I'm trying to show, I'm just going to have to walk you through and explain, here's what's here kind of thing. So a little boring, but probably less so than watching me type, which is tedious. So first thing I'm going to do is going to walk you through the application. We have 2 applications that are essentially the same application, just implemented differently. One is going to be implemented in the Xamarin.Forms to show how they implement MVVM, and the other one is going to be a FreshMVVM process as well. But the first thing we want to do is actually walk you through what the app is. Now, I got the inspiration for this app from James Montemagno's tabbed interface for Xamarin.Forms piece. So basically, I stole a lot of his ideas and put an MVVM veneer on top of it. The basic idea is it's a series of Star Trek made-up quotes. They might actually be real quotes, I'm not entirely certain. But I wanted to have a bunch of navigation going on, a little bit of demonstrating some of the data binding aspects, and passing parameters so you can actually see a lot of what we're talking about. So there's a few different navigation pieces in here. But basically, you've got each page is more or less the same. We've got a label, a form of entry, and a character count. And the idea is that every time I'm typing, for those who've seen data binding before, right, 2 things are happening. Is that as I'm making a change using the data binding and the MVVM classes, I'm changing one field and the other 2 are getting updated in response. So for those of you familiar with data binding, that's pretty clear. We've done data binding in WPF. It's exactly the same concept, just done in this technology. From here, I've got a little bit of extra navigation, clean up code. A few different pages here, as well as a full tap interface across the bottom. And then, question?
I'm sorry.
James Montemagno's application actually did say that rest in peace, Leonard Nimoy. I decided to add to it by actually saying the date because it's not current anymore, but still something I wanted to include in there as well. I figure if I'm going to steal Star Trek quotes and make fun of it, I might as well do something good within the process. So the idea, this last page here is a list, and it goes to a detailed page that again has same stuff. Now again, passing a bunch of quotes around and stuff by itself really isn't all that interesting until you start looking at what's going on behind the scenes. And that's something we're going to delve into in a little bit, but I want to make certain you guys saw what we're talking about, so when I refer to the board page, you've seen it, right? Okay, so let's get back into the demo here, or the screenshots. Okay, so when we're talking about the MVVM pattern, how many of you are familiar with the term design patterns? If I say the word design, okay, a good definition of that for you guys. Okay, a design pattern is just simply an algorithm or a logical approach for solving a particular problem. Just think of it as if you got that little puzzle game, at Cracker Barrel or whatever, where you got the little triangle and all the pegs, and you drop over and move the pegs. You've got a pattern for how you solve that, and once you figure it out, it's the same pattern every time. But, so when you get to another triangle game, you can use a similar pattern to do it. Likewise for code, once you've got the pattern and the pieces together, you're able to actually reuse that approach, reuse that pattern, knowing that it works and it's stood the test of time as well as other application development. So MVVM pattern is one of those design patterns that we're talking about. I want to talk a little bit about the goals of it, what's it trying to accomplish, a few of the criticisms of it, they do exist out there, and so I've got a slide full of resources that we can look up later. I'm going to make certain that we get the slide presentation up there so you can actually get access to all the pieces I'm showing you here. The overview, just in case anyone was wondering, the pattern was created by Microsoft in 2005 as a variation or enhancement on the MVC-MV pattern, which model view controller, model view presenter patterns. Very similar in use for like a lot of the ASP.NET MVC uses that pattern. The basic idea is try to separate your visual components from your business logic components so you can mix and match as far as you want to go with it. And it's a very simplified way of describing it. And it's also, the MVVM pattern is designed to take advantage of the data binding capabilities. So ultimately, it looks like this. With the MVVM model, view model. And basic idea is that the view itself has the presentation display items. The view model generally contains the presentation logic that supports that display. For example, I might say, oh, I got a view that says, here is the character count that we just saw on the screen. But the view itself isn't responsible for figuring out the value of that count. That's the view model's job. Separation of the concerns. The other advantage of this, although I've never seen it done in practice, is that the views can actually be done by a UX designer writing the views, only to be populated and powered by the developer writing the view model. So not only is it a separation of concerns for the object, but conceivably separation of concerns for the personnel actually doing the work. Has anyone ever done it that way in any of their projects ever? No, generally, yeah, I haven't seen it either. So generally, this is still work that we all do as developers, so it's good to know. Between these two classes, there's a little data binding piece. It's sort of an invisible set of classes. They exist. We tend not to worry about it. We just tell, hey, the view, bind over to that, and the binding classes just kind of work for us. From there, we have the side with the models. This is where they describe it officially as the business logic and or the data pieces. I tend to separate those two pieces when I'm actually coding in that the business logic I tend to have in service classes. Basically a class that you call a method, it does something, it gives you something in return. This kind of class isn't tied to any of the view pieces, which means it's capable of being used in multiple places. And the model itself tends to be I consider them more data transfer objects that pass the data around. So rather than I'm passing a string or I'm passing an integer, I can pass a quote object and then operate on the properties of that quote object once it's been passed around. And just to be nice, I copied this picture off the internet, and so I quoted the guy who actually did it here in the bottom. Okay, so we talked about the MVVM objectives. Separation of concerns, utilize data binding, take advantage of IOC/DI. Who knows what I mean? Okay, IOC, DI, inversion of control, and dependency injection are two other design patterns that work really well into the MVVM pattern itself, because they're related patterns for architecture and design. The basic idea is the premise that when you're using an inversion of control container, normally you would write a class and the class knows what it needs. So if I got a view class and I said, okay, I got to call a quote object, I go create the quote object, I'll find the view, I'll go get the quote object and go. Normal control. Inversion of control flips that around. Inversion of control says, hey, the class that instantiates the class in question gets to decide what that service or that view is, or that functionality is. And it can change its mind depending on what it is. So if I've got a quote view, it wants to use a quote service, the quote service can come in directly, give me the quotes I need. But if I'm writing a unit test, I may want to give it a mock service. The class shouldn't have to care or know the difference between the two. Putting the dependencies outside of the class and letting the controller class decide for it gives you a lot more freedom and flexibility. I'll try to get into some of that later in more detail. Like I said, this improves testability, and the theoretical allow UX to work on visual aspects. Yeah, that myth somewhere. Thomas Band wrote a tool called MVVMNano, and he summarized a lot of the goals of MVVM in his manifesto. And I've got a copy here for you guys. Basic ideas. One, each view needs to have its own view model. Every time that you present stuff on the screen, you have to have some class that has some logic in it that helps you out. Views know their view models, but not the other way around. So the view can say, oh, I'm quote detail page. I got a quote detail view model. I get to know what that is because I'm referring to objects on it even if I'm going through data binding. The view model itself, in theory, cannot and should not know the view it's being attached to. So as it changes the value, that's where we have a lot of the INotify property stuff that we'll get into in a bit. It will actually get a chance to say, hey, I made a change, whoever's listening, go do whatever it is you're going to do. I don't care, right? But as long as you've been informed. That's effectively what the INotify property is going to do. And I'll show you that a little bit more. Given that, those two things, navigation should work from view model to view model only without involving the view. So in other words, the view itself should be a piece of the puzzle, not the mastermind that sets the pieces up together. Also, navigating, passing complex objects, you can't just restrict it to end objects. You got to be able to pass classes through into it. The other things he has is no limits to how to present views. Each view should be able to do what it needs to do. View models must be easily testable. So that's where this dependency injection thing comes in, where the outside class is able to tell it, here's the function you need. As long as you have a shared interface, we're good to go. And his last thing is both views and view models must be easy to clean up. I think for a large part they are, unless you're doing a lot of managed objects that you have to specifically clean up yourself. MVVMNano actually has an extra layer of methods and functions that you can use to call dispose from. Generally haven't had a need for those yet. Among the many criticisms of MVVM, and like I said, there are some, if you got a really small app that's just 2 or 3 pages, it can be overkill. It can be way too much for what you're trying to accomplish. You've got 3 pages that says, hey, hi, good morning, send an email to somebody, we're done. You don't need a big enterprise level architecture for that application, especially if you're not going to be unit testing it and you're just going to manually test it because it's 3 pages. You know, it might be overkill, it's too much. If you have a very, very large application, you're going to run into overlapping functionality in view models combined with specific business type rules that go with it. So the challenge there is, how do you generalize the code? You know, maybe you have a common base class that you want to throw a bunch of the common pieces up. But if anyone ever designed the inheritance hierarchy of a bunch of functionality? Okay, a couple of us have. You got this great idea, and all of a sudden then you start making a bunch of exceptions, right? That's the kind of challenge that we're talking about with that. So I tend not to be big on huge hierarchies. And then, you know, if the application is really large, might be memory intensive, so you got to watch out for that. But that's true of any large application. And, you know, since you're using data binding, debugging that can be a little bit more difficult than just simply having a view set the value of a text for a label. So those are the kind of things that we've got as criticisms. And oh, by the way, this list of criticisms came from the same guy who designed the pattern in the first place. So it's not a case of anybody picking on it, he's picking on himself, really. Here are the resources that I was talking about. Just basically some Microsoft's design of the pattern, Wikipedia's version of it, some more articles about it, as well as this last one, John Gossman's doing Advantages and Disadvantages of MVVM. That's that last link. We'll be sure to make certain that you guys get the slides so you can have that information. Okay. So among the things that we want to do, there's so many things in the topic, and I wanted to focus on 3 primary areas. The first one's going to be data binding. You know, for any kind of MVVM to work, you want good, solid data binding behind it. We also talked a little bit about view model navigation and inversion of control and dependency injection. And so when I'm working with that, those are the 3 things I want most. And of course, there's a whole host of other little things that I want too, but these are the 3 things that come to mind for me. Data binding, like I said, syncs data between the view model and the view using binder classes. You know, those are the visible classes that the Xamarin.Forms provides for us with the binding pieces. And you know, the view model doesn't know what class it syncs with. I mentioned that already. In order to make this work, it implements the iNotify property changed interface. And really, just because you do an interface and support it with methods, there really is many different ways to achieve the same results. And so, we go back to a demo, and I want to show you a few different ways of how this can be accomplished. Mirror slice. Okay, so what I've got is, let me turn it around, there we go, is the application. Apologize, I'm not certain how to make the solution side bigger for zooming, so if you know it, spit it out. But the text I can make bigger in the actual classes. Take that down a little bit. Okay, so the first thing we got, is I'm going to give you a quick little walkthrough of the application itself while we do this, is I've got a set of models. Again, this is the actual data transfer object used for what we've got. In this case, it's just simply a quote type. Quote type is just enumeration. Basically, if we had a list of quote type for the value of the service, and you know, each quote has a quote type attached to it, and then some text. Really oversimple. The services here that we're talking about, you know, we have an interface that seems to be important to every code. It's got a get quote given by the type, and can provide the whole list of the data. Any class that calls this doesn't need to know how the service gets the data. So we actually cheat a little bit, and we just simply add it in manually. You know, we could just as easily have used an XML file, call to a website, or a web API, get the pieces in place. And these are the quotes that we have. Simple method, get the quote list, return the object, or get the quotes by itself. We're good to go there. Now, as we're talking about this, I'm going to go into the view model a little bit. And so I've got the board view model. Again, the naming convention usually is view model, view for the views, service, all these classes have service or view model in there, so you have an idea what they are. Some of the frameworks will actually rely on that naming convention being used so it knows what the object is through reflection. Okay, so the board view model itself is just any old class, and this and it does the iNotify property change interface. As a class variable of the service, we just create a new service as we open the class, call the quote getter board quote test, set our page title, set our quote, and here's our character count. Now, the basic approach here of all these patterns, the things that you want to consider, is that these are simply properties that you bind to. If you want to get the value, you just return whatever value in your backing store is. In this case, underscore quote. Just a string in this view model. If you want to set the value, there's a couple things you can do to make it a little nicer. The idea is, first thing is, did it change? Because you're going to do a bunch of work with the events and publishing, things changed. Let's make certain that it's worth doing because the value is actually different. Okay, so we check the value. If the value is different, assign it. In this case, since I'm changing the quote string because I just typed it, we're going to say, hey, character count, your value is now my length of the new value. We don't do a whole lot of self-calculating, whatever. It just simply goes, I added a character, here's your new value. Then we do the raise property change piece in here, which is simply a call out that says, hey, I changed. You see the same thing with the page title here, and the character count, they have the very same format. Now, if you'll note, if the whole idea of the raise property change piece is to say, hey, I've changed, and if you take a close look here, really? Who the heck are you? What's the property name that's changed? Normally, when we do this, we'll actually put the property name in quotes. Generally do not like that method at all. And the reason for it is, if I change the name of the property or copy and paste it, well, you've refactored the property name and its usage, but it doesn't go inside where the quotes are. Go ahead.
Can you use C# 6.0?
Yes. Thank you for the segue. One of the other options that we can do is use the name of, and I'm going to go quote. That way, it converts the actual property name with the property reference, which is refactorable, into the string at compile time. Now, so that's one way of handling it, but it's also the way that if I want this property to say, I've changed, another property over here needs to change too, you can say, well, I'm changing, and this property here is the name of that property, in case you can handle that. And that's how I would do that if it's not the caller property. But if we look at the actual implementation of the iNotify property change, it's really just that event call. In this case, I just simply set it to a default empty delegate. Doing that is a nice little trick that helps you avoid the if property change is not null call before you actually call it. Because remember when you're doing events, if you call it null, you get a null reference error. This is just a little way of saying it's set to something, even if it doesn't do anything, you're good to go. But the important piece here is this piece right here, caller member name attribute on the parameter. What this does, it just says, well, if this is all defaulting, we're going to replace property name with the value string of the property that actually called us. Which is why I can say raise property change no parameter here, here, and here, because this little feature will automatically set that in for us.
So that's the compiler doing the work
Yes.
for you, right?
Yes. That's deferring a lot of the work to the compiler for us. Actually, that one, it might be the compiler, it might actually be runtime. Not sure, it doesn't know. Go ahead.
You could also make a method out of the all the settings. All the settings are the same.
Oh, exactly. We're going to get to the next page for that in just a second here. Now, we're going to go to the human view model, where we do exactly that. Did you see the slides before we started? No. I'm kidding. Okay, so the basic idea is another view model class, quote service, the same quote, only it's the human quote, not the board quote. Everything you've seen before, the difference, of course, is everything we put in the set is actually abstracted into a single method, which is really kind of nice. And the method does a couple things. Well, if it's a single method, we have to have the ability to have it do something, right? Before, remember, the quote actually set the character count for us, so we have to reflect for that. So basically, what we do is we pass in by reference the backing store, the actual value, and for the onChange parameter, we could give it an action, which is going to say char count equals quote.length. Exactly what we called it before, but the idea is that this method is all a single method doing the work. It's a little more complicated because it's got a few extra parameters. It's got property name again, like we'd seen before, in action. But basically, it does all the same things we did before. Did the value actually change from the backing store to the value we're trying to set it? If it didn't, bye-bye. We don't need to worry about it. The backing store becomes whatever value we're setting to if it changed. On change, here we are using some of the more 6.0 syntax. On change is null, with the question mark. If it's not null, we go ahead and invoke it. If it is null, we just skip it. It's a nice way of saying, if this is null, don't throw the exception. Just keep going. And then raise property change, just like before, we call it property name. Same concept, same functionality that we saw before, but implemented slightly differently so that if we ever change how we handle the set property, I don't have 100 properties that I have to change that set logic in. I just change it here. So that's one of the big advantages for this piece. Now, again, when you compare this to here, the main advantage is you've got a method that you're able to reuse. Again, it doesn't save you a whole lot of space or complexity inside the code itself. But there's another way that I'm going to present here. And that's using a third-party property change implementer. This one, PropertyChanged.Fody, is what I'm going to show you, but there are a few other ones out there in NuGet. And basically, we give it, simply install the package, like any other NuGet package, use the namespace, implement property change, which simply says, for this class, do your property change work. And this is the rest of it. We can use automatic quotes, automatic properties, getters and setters, and the class itself at compile time will convert it to something that looks like the first model for us. Which means, if that's all I want, all I have to do is create some automatic properties, add an attribute to the class, and go. Okay?
What if I want to add special logic into my setter?
Right. If you have, then you would just simply create a class and have your own set method that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. So the Fody doesn't. Well, actually, will it still fire the property change if you do that?
Fody won't touch it because it assumes if you're not using an automatic setter, it says, okay, you've got it covered.
Gotcha.
So the idea is if you have something special, in one particular case that I want an exception, okay, so you write that exception piece of the code. You can do your own if change, call 3 different methods, set it up, or use the second option and have that little action call, a method that does the work for us. But definitely works in there. Now the other neat part.
It's using reflection.
What's the question?
This class, property change is using reflection to find out what setters are.
Yes, I believe that is the case.
It's not the compile time.
Okay. That could be, I haven't looked close enough at the source code. So if it's reflection that does it, then that would be just fine too.
I think the Fody changes it at compile time, because there is a step when you're building.
Yeah, that
Gives
does
you
that.
the amount of time that Fody took to run. I think what it does is it takes it and then it changes what you have up there, the automatic setter into the explicit setter.
On that. I'd actually have to look at that to confirm that, but I think it is it converts the class before it compiles.
Would be before the next, after compiler.
No. Well, I think it changes the class before it compiles the class.
In the Fody documentation, they have an example of you start with this, and then after Fody it compiles out to, and it's the full, boilerplate code stuff that nobody really wants to write.
Yeah. So, either way, the goal here is that it predominantly simplifies the code work that we have to do on the page by deferring it to either, to the compiler or to reflection, depending on the various methods that you want to use for it. Now, the last thing I want to point out is that char count here is just simply quote.length. Fody, in this case, is smart enough to say, oh, not only do I say this property when I change the set, I actually call all the properties that refer to this property as well. So basically, anytime you set it, anything that calls it also gets raised as well, which is why on the welcome page, that same functionality of changing the text will work just fine. Any questions on?
Is that the simplest one? That's the one we should probably focus on for simplicity?
That's what I did on most of the applications that I've worked on since I learned about this, yeah. But you may want to look at it and say, well, there's a couple different varieties, which one suits you best. Generally, they're probably all going to do the same thing. But if you got, for me, is if I got Fody's property changed, and then I'm using ACR's dialog, user dialogues, then it might be run into a situation where, oh, I've got a settings thing that I need to use. I could go grab a third-party one, or I could go grab Fody settings, or I could go grab ACR settings. Generally, I would tend to, if you've got one, I would stick with that same builder's tool set, unless there's a reason not to. That's my 2 cents worth. The mileage may vary, of course. Any other questions on this? Yep, okay. Go back to space, back up here, and setting up. Okay, so we got, again, a little bit more information on PropertyChanged.Fody. It's simplified ways of implementing a notified property change. Available via NuGet. It's called PropertyChanged.Fody if you want to look it up. And here's the GitHub site and information down at the bottom. So that way it's source code available, so we can take a look at it and say, okay, here's the instructions, their sample, and access to the source code. If you want to see it, it's right there. So if you like it but want to change it, well, pull a request or copy it and create your own or something. But that gives us the idea. We're talking about data binding. And the neat part about that is that's all good for every Xamarin.Forms application that you've got. The data binding is in there, pretty rock solid for what we've got in place. The next thing we want to talk about is that, okay, now how does Xamarin.Forms actually go to take and do MVVM? I alluded to that a little bit a second ago, but we can implement MVVM in Xamarin.Forms. They teach a class on doing it. We leverage the built-in data binding, and the thing is, you don't have to bind to a class called ViewModel. You can bind to any class anywhere as long as the view can access it. It could be a static property on a particular class. If they have an example of a list of Simpsons characters, and then you bind your list to a separate class that's just completely out of your process. And the basic idea is they need to do that because not everyone's going to use an MVVM pattern, but they still need this particular data binding functionality. The other part is that you'll know as we do this, they use page level navigation. Your pages know about the pages, so that one page navigates to the next page to the next. Again, you can't guarantee someone's going to use MVVM, so your page level navigation is required for Xamarin.Forms for that reason. And they're called pages, but they really represent the view part of the MVVM pattern. Okay, let's go back over. Back over here. Now, again, we walked through the code a little bit. Let's go take a look at the page. I'll show you the simple piece that we have in here. Again, binding on an object. We have two objects binding a quote. One's a label, one's an entry. You see how that all ties together. Now, when we start talking about a page class itself coming through, you're responsible for instantiating and controlling your view model and setting it up. So in this case here, my binding context, I deliberately set it to a view model so I can actually replicate a lot of the view model expectations. This is a case of where the page or the view actually knows about the view model and sets it up and instantiates it. In this case, I actually pass it the navigation object from the view so we can do some navigation in the view model. That's one of the things that we want to do. For the human page, we don't have the extra navigation piece, so it's a very simple create the view model, and set it as a binding context. So the basic idea here is that from a Xamarin.Forms perspective, you can actually create your presentation logic in separate classes and use them the same way we do MVVM anywhere else. And one of the other things to do is that we also talked about one of the requirements of being passing parameters. So I got a quote list page here, which creates our view model. And every time we do a tap, I basically simply go, here's a navigation object, and we pass it in. This, again, is a sample of navigation on the page itself. So that's, in a nutshell, how Xamarin.Forms implements MVVM. So, you know, we've started seeing the code a lot, so there's not a whole lot of examples. But I've got a few things on it that I'm not exactly fond of with it. I'm going to go back to a question that I had.
Quick question before
Yes,
you switch
Tom.
over. I see in your project there, you've got an quote service, and you're actually implementing it in your services folder on
Yep.
the left side, and you're actually implementing it in your shared project. Do you normally do that? Usually we see implementation in the platform-specific project.
From a service?
Yeah, is there a reason you did that there as opposed to like a static class, or what's your thinking?
Well, the idea behind using a service with an interface over a static class is that a static class actually has to have the name of the specific class. It has the same problem with using a singleton. Is the whole dependency injection version of control thing comes into play. And you know, what I've got here is a case where we're not really using those two concepts to any great degree. So when we have, let's see, a board view model, if you look at the star at the top, I created an instance of the service. Now the idea is that this service could be in a separate project. You might have a shareable services object, as long as the services don't need to know about anything about your platform, in this case, Xamarin.Forms, then move it into another PCL library if you want to reuse it elsewhere. You certainly can, because it might just simply be an interface to a web client library whose job is to call, get data, save data, and all we do is just interface that through the service. Now that could be in a separate library, which could be used in multiple applications. For an app this size with one service, I just do a folder here.
So you could even spin that out to a business logic and assembly or a project itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason this particular service isn't implemented in, say, Droid or iOS, is simply that there is no platform-specific items in it.
Right.
In this case, return a list of common platform-agnostic code. It doesn't need to be in the platform, and it should be accessible by the app, not the platform-specific. Otherwise, it'll force you into two implementations of exactly the same thing.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And but for example, if you're doing a file system service where the physical implementations are different, you absolutely have to have, some form of dependency service coding in there at all. Think of the iFactor file system, how that used to work and stuff. Those pieces were implemented that way. And so that's the idea. So we got quote service here, human view model, got the quote service here, and Vulkan view model here again. So remember I said about larger applications, you got to watch the memory usage. I've got 3 instances of the service running around. Small enough for this demo, doesn't really matter. But for larger systems, you're going to want a method to help you work with that. And one thing would be, use a singleton and just call this single instance of it. If you're not doing anything more testing, you don't need the IOC and other injection, you could just say quote service dot instance dot get or whatever you want to do, and do exactly the same thing that you used to do. I deliberately left that out of this app, so I want to show it in use in the other version of the application. Any other questions on this? Okay. So all of this, so that I talked about, and I know I've alluded to this a few times, it really begs a really, really big question. If Xamarin.Forms already supports MVVM, why do we need an MVVM framework to go with it? And the answer, there's lots of possible answers. In fact, for me, as I'm like a recent convert to this approach as well. When I first learned the Xamarin MVVM approach, that was how I did a few applications, liked it, thought it was good, and then I kept getting asked about, so, what MVVM framework did you use with Xamarin.Forms? So like, it has one built in. Why would you want to do that? It's like, and I'll share a little personal story. I was interviewing with Xamarin itself. It had Jonathan Lipsky. He's like a Xamarin MVP and really big on Stack Overflow and stuff. And so he was asking me all sorts of questions, and he was one of the guys who asked me the question and then made me really, really think about the answer. Because I gave him the same answer of, no, you don't need it. We're building it using the peer, whatever you got. He goes, oh, okay. So it's so much, and it's one thing that stuck out to me is like, oops, I think I'm missing something really, really important. I better go figure out what it is. In fact, well, a little history is that my original title of this presentation was going to be, use an MVVM framework in Xamarin, ... really? With a question mark. But we thought that particular tone and inflection would be lost in the title. So we decided to keep it a little simpler with that, and I'd be, snarky, use my inflection here when I'm actually talking. But here's some possible answers for it. First one comes to mind, dependency injection. I'm creating a quote service. It's a simple two-piece interface, right? Very easy, very simple. Don't need to worry anything about it. Now let's say we're doing a complicated one that has 50 items. And I want to go, you know what? Someone says, hey, let's unit test this. Oh, do I really want my view model, when I'm trying to unit test my view model, to tell me, the testing class, how it should use its dependency? And the answer is no, you don't. Because you want to be able to say, I want to test this view model in isolation and control the other pieces around it. If the class is smart enough to know everything it needs all the time, then it has to know, am I in testing mode? It has to know, am I in production mode? Now, how do you implement that in the class and still be supporting some flexibility? You can. It's ugly. I think clean coding would refer to that as a code smell or something like that. And you don't necessarily want to do that. Like I said, better testability, because you can, if you actually tell it, hey, or a view model, here's your quote service. I want you to use this one. It's an interface. We're coded to the interface. The class goes, yeah, whatever. I'll call this method. I'm expecting this type of response. I don't care. But the advantage for us as coders is that if we're actually using a dependency injection in our system, we can create the object, we can store it, we can say, oh, we want to use one of them. We want to always use a new one. Oh, we can use a fake inside here. For example, I was working on an app where I'm actually trying to code to an interface for the web service calls that didn't exist yet. But I'm trying to stub that out, so we created the interface of what we were going to eventually fill out. I created a fake version of it, looked just like a quote service, and said, oh, give me a list of bank accounts for a particular member. Well, okay, I just created a list and said, okay, here's my list of fake data coming back. And all I have to do to switch that out is simply tell the class, use the fake one, use the real one. The class never knew the difference. So when I'm using the fake one, I could build the class, show it, test it out. I could use the fake class to provide the data, or a mock, when I'm doing the unit test for that particular class. I hope I didn't just lose everybody, right? What are you doing, Steve? Okay, so the basic idea is you've got that. So that hopefully should be a case for considering dependency injection. IOC, managing instances of the services. This is a case of, oh, remember how we had to ask the question of, are we going to use a singleton, or are we going to use some other form of way of getting the classes we need? Even if the class is smart enough to say, hey, I need one of these, whatever it is, using a resolve kind of statement, it still has to know where to go get the class rather than just simply being told. And the other big complaint with the Xamarin.Forms MVVM approach, it's nice, it's good, it's a good start. Navigation in the view model rather than the pages. And this is one of the biggest things that annoyed me about it in the first place. Because if you've got the rule, the view model can't know anything about the view, and then we say, oh, Borg view model, remember? What's the first thing in the constructor? Navigation object, and I keep a local copy of it. Well, it's navigation object, it's not a view. No, it's a property inside the view. Not only are you violating the first rule, you're going into implementation territory, which you probably shouldn't be going in. So that's part of one of the things that I really don't like about it. And why is this a big deal? Imagine for a second you're trying to mix page navigation with the view model in a separate class. We could violate the rule, like I just said, pass the navigation object out, and you do all your business logic. If all your button does is navigate, it doesn't matter where the navigation call goes. But if you say, oh, push the button, and the view model is going to do a bunch of work, and then decide, do I navigate A, B, or C, or not navigate at all? Well, if you're doing page navigation, well, I got 3 page navigation calls in the page object, trying to be accessed by the view model that's not supposed to know about the page. So, how do we fix that? Well, you could pass the navigation object and say, well, least of all, yeah, lesser of two evils. Or you could be, let's be real purist about this and shoot ourselves in the foot and use Messaging Center. You all know what Messaging Center is? PubSub, right? So we could say, oh, when you want to navigate, instead of doing it directly and say, yo, view, go here. We're going to say, Message Center, navigate to the human quote page. Now the page itself over here says, oh, I'm subscribed to that. Now I'm going to navigate. Talk about overkill, over-architecting, and really shooting yourself in the foot to follow a rule that, could probably be implemented slightly differently. Again, these are the things that I think Xamarin's got awesome data binding. None of the frameworks I looked at touch it. They all go, hey, that's good, we'll use that. Throwing in the navigation page model, doesn't do it at all. No built-in IOC. Again, my example has 3 view models. Each one implements its code service. There's a couple other view models that do the same. Now I got 5 copies of the service running around. Again, how do I simplify it? Singleton. Yeah, it's close. It would kind of help, kind of work. If you're not doing testing, again, you don't have to worry about it. So there comes in one of the criticisms of all of this MVVM stuff, is that it's very easy to over-architect something for what you need. If you're doing a simple page, all of the stuff that we're talking about isn't really going to matter. Do I really need to write unit tests for a 1-page app that's a simple add 2 numbers together? And the answer is no, unless you're doing a demo to show how to do it. But for actual working stuff, you probably don't need it. But if you're doing something more complicated, that you have multiple team members on, people working at different classes, you've got a manager who has heard that unit testing is great and you need to be doing it, now you got to start thinking about these extra things because they are very important. 14, oh, I got it right here too. We're actually almost done. And yeah, talk about the navigation view issues. I think I've covered all of those pieces. The basic idea is, I'm not fond of the problems that presents.
This looks very similar to ASP and VC4, and now the new VC4 has solution to all those problems by having all of the IOC built in and all that stuff. So I'm assuming it's open source now, right? Or it will be open source?
Oh, yeah. The FreshMVVM is already open source.
So we can change it. I mean, we can change the...
Yeah. The code that you write, you can actually write your own IOC controller. You can use tiny IOC. FreshMVVM, that I'm going to show you in a second, created their own version or copy of tiny IOC. The basic idea is that so you can use their MVVM model inside a separate application that already has tiny IOC implemented without stepping on each other's toes, basically. So let's get back to the demo. And actually, everyone is clear on the problem they have with navigation. I don't need to walk through and show you the code for that, unless you want to see it. Because we're running short on time a little bit. Okay, so let's skip that piece. Just imagine that I had samples in the code of all of the pieces that I'm talking about. Okay, now here we go. We're going to our third part of the demo, which is actually FreshMVVM. Basically, it's a pre-written framework that has the solutions to some of the problems that I brought up. It's a lightweight framework for Xamarin.Forms. History-wise, it was inspired by MVVM Cross. and it's designed to enhance Xamarin.Forms rather than replace it or duplicate it. So if you remember, like the original MVVM Cross had its own view, navigation system, and it's had its own binding system. And if you throw that unchanged onto Xamarin.Forms, now you have two data binding systems, right? They do work technically together, but there's a lot of extra overhead. Later versions of MVVM Cross lighten things up considerably, so it could work better with Xamarin.Forms. Okay, thing to note is that it follows the Xamarin.Forms page nomenclature. So you've got a page calling it a view. So instead of a view model, their nomenclature is page model. As far as the MVVM pattern goes, it refers to the same type of object. But it uses reflection to determine what all the pieces are for us. It's created by Michael Ridland of Xam Consulting. He's out of Australia. A couple links to his sites in his blog. And it works with Xamarin.Forms data binding again. Does itself. It has page model navigation. It supports the IOC container, and it supports dependency injection. So let's go take a look at it. We're going to switch into the other application that I have here as well. Ultimately, it's the same application you've seen from a user's perspective. But again, we've got the models. You've seen that. See the quote. The services, again, exactly the same. I pretty much just copied them over. The XAML pieces, straight up copies for the XAML code. Behind the scenes, they all look the same in the code behind. And they have that one line of code that every XAML-based content page needs. The inflator. You got a bunch of XML. It's got to be converted into objects that you can touch and instantiate. That's what this ultimately does for you. It does a few other things behind the scenes, but we can go into that later if you need to. What I want to talk about is the service itself and how we've implemented the IOC container. And that's going to be simply in our application object itself. I've got the constructor simply setting up the IOC, setting up the tab navigation. Simple amount for the tab navigation. Again, it refers to all of the page models, whereas standard Xamarin.Forms tab container refers to the page itself. And here we go. I have an IOC container full of exactly one object. Again, like I said, it's overkill in general to do this for one object, one class, unless you're demoing it. And the register is simply, you give it the interface, you give it the class it wants to go. Now, let's say it was a big complicated class, and I wanted to go, well, I got a fake quote service that I want to use instead. By swapping out the fake quote service to a real quote service, it's as simple as this. Okay.
So, John, I was actually playing around with FreshMVVM about a month or two ago, and I liked most of how it worked. I have a few complaints. But one thing was that I ended up having to, for things like authentication or basically platform-dependent services, how would you register those with the IOC container? Would you use compiler, the little hashtag thingies?
The compiler directives.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Or how else would you do that?
Well, the basic thing here is that there's another class that I pulled out of the app that they show on the demos for that. Basically, is that well, for ACR dialogues, for example, has an iUser dialogues piece, but the implementation isn't the class. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to go user dialogues instance. Right, so the idea is, if you're using an authorization or another third-party set of plugins, one of your criteria needs to be, if you want to use an IOC approach, is very simply have them make sure they give you an interface for the classes they're going to use. That sets us up here for the application itself. Now, they have a little initializer in main activity that they want you to set up for ACR itself. I got this thing up here. Here we go. It's a simple initialization class. So any of the classes that you want to use should have this particular piece in there. Now, from an IOC perspective, the way I would most likely do that is if, for example, if they didn't give you the interface and then the platform-specific objects being named the same and support the interface, which in this case they do, and you have something radically different. Let's say you need one solution for iOS and a different solution for Android because those are the best-of-breed tools that you want to use. And the trick with that is you create the interface of the common functionalities that you want to use because you're trying to share the interface even if you write the interface and create wrapper adapter type classes around it. So you basically would create a conversion class or an adapter class that takes the specific implementation on a platform, lets the system know what it is. You could actually use compiler directors on that, or even using the Xamarin.Forms dependency service. So you could create your iAuthorization class, and then your class you implement is, oh, okay, let's implement this particular class and go ask the dependency service to get it for us. So there's a few different ways of handling the cross-platform with different interfaces in there. Generally, I'd like to push everything towards a common interface and then let the ILC sort it out. For example, here, user dialogues instance evaluates differently depending on what platform you're on. And they wrap actually, user dialogues is just a collection of Toast, BT Hub, and a bunch of other functionality all under a single wrapper that just simply says, oh, we can call it in shared code and it'll just handle the loading indicator for us. We just say, oh, show loading. Android does it one way with one tool. iOS does it another way with a different tool. As far as our code is concerned, we call the same interface to turn it on and turn it off in shared code. That answer your question?
More or less.
Okay, good. Okay, so the basic idea, we have the service. Every time we add a service and create the service, the IOC container is smart enough when it tries to resolve things, it takes a look at your constructor. And this is using a form of dependency injection known as constructor injection, because every class has a constructor and you can always query what the signature is. And you can say, oh, this class has a signature of, let's see, we'll go to board view model here. Right up in here, our constructor has an quote service in the class. So as we're navigating to the page model, one of the things it does is, oh, I've got the page model, I can find it. Hey, page model, what's your constructor? Again, the controlling class is going to interrogate the page model, find out, oh, look, iQuote service is part of our constructor. And it's going to immediately go, hey, IOC container, I need an iQuote service. The container is going to come back, give it an actual instance, which then we use in part of our constructor when we actually instantiate the class. You can use any number of interfaces through this, and it'll still work. If we had like 5 different interfaces we're supporting in the ILC, I could put 3 in here, 2 in the Vulkan one. Doesn't matter, it's all smart enough to do it. And the neat part is, let's say you have a broad user service that another service uses as part of its constructor. The same concept applies because when the ILC says, oh, I'm going to give you the first copy of this service, it's going to ask, what's your constructor, and is there another service in our class that we need to provide to you? That's the advantage of an IOC container and dependency injection. The neat part is that app does it for us. It can handle the singleton aspects, it can handle the, whether we want to do a specific class or whether we want to just let it create it and go. We're good to go. When I do unit tests, I can say, oh, I want to do a Borg page model unit test. Here's my mock quote service. View model doesn't care. I only want to know, did you call the method I was looking for you to call? Yes, okay, we passed the test. Part of the mock verify functionality. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that I wanted to show this. Oh, navigation too, by the way. We simply here's the navigation that we're used to looking at. But this case, it's all in the view model using a FreshMVVM class called core methods. Push the page model, and we just simply tell it which page model type to do. It'll take care of itself. Or we call it with an argument. And we'll go over to quote detail.
So in this case, the view model knows about other view models, but not necessarily views.
Right. So this case is, it's okay for a view model to know about the other view models, because it's view model to view model navigation. It's not okay for a view model, in theory, if you follow that particular rule, for a view model to know about its own view, much less any other views that you wanted to have it navigate to. So that's part of the navigational issues there. But here it is. When I talk about the quote detail page model, there's a little extra class. Here's a constructor. It doesn't have any extra pieces into it. But there's an init class that once the class is constructed, it will actually say, oh, well, the object we were told to pass to you, here it is. It comes through as an object, and we simply cast it into the quote level that we've got. So as far as passing an object from the list, you select one, we pass the quote to the detail, and current quote is exactly what we're showing the user for the application, which is right here. Current quote, dot quote type. So that's those two pieces. I see dependency injection. We are 2 minutes left, so some more information. Again, FreshMVVM is on GitHub. You install a few packages like you do everything else. A set of videos. How many of you have seen the video, the N+1 series from Stuart Lodge for MVVM Cross? Okay, a couple of us have. Basically, this is Michael Ridland's version of that. He's got a few classes of here's how you set things up and get things going. I've just put together a few links. He's only got a few of them, but they're enough to actually teach us how to do the demo that we've got here. So basically, so that in conclusion, those are the three things we covered. We talked about the MVVM pattern. We talked about how Xamarin.Forms implements MVVM. Some of its things that it does really well, data binding, some things not so much. Dependency injection, navigation. And we talked a little bit about how FreshMVVM with those two pieces alleviates some of those concerns that we had. Any questions?
Are you using commands at all, commanding? Does FreshMVVM provide anything?
No, but it allows you to use the command objects that you would normally bind to.
Okay.
So if you use this, like we can certainly show that, but the navigation in the board view model, or page model, excuse me, actually has 3 commands that actually do the control the navigation, and we just simply bind the view buttons to those commands.
Okay, that's the built-in Xamarin.Forms stuff.
Yes,
Yep.
and it's one of those things that it didn't need to have a special MVX command by itself because Xamarin.Forms already provided a lot of this functionality, whereas when MVVM Cross was written, that was just straight up you have to do everything because classic Xamarin doesn't have those pieces. That's something that Xamarin.Forms gives us. Any other questions? Kate?
I know apart from the push page model method to navigate to another page, you can use the page model resolver class.
Mm-hmm.
Have you worked with that a lot? Because I know I tried it out, and when I did, if I had something that would cause a binding error in my XAML,
Mm-hmm.
that would normally throw an exception on, plain old not using any framework, it eats the exception.
Okay.
And the page just doesn't load. So
Yep.
I want those hours of my life back. But
I can't blame you for that. I haven't done the direct use of the page resolver classes, but what I have encountered is if I got a binding error on the page, it would just not show the page or do anything and go, okay, until you actually started putting debug code in the spots where you go. And then you could finally navigate exception base, exception base. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I misspelled label. Thank you. Or I did binding with 2 Ds or something, I don't know. But some of those things are, again, the stuff isn't perfect. And it probably should be catching it earlier on in the cycle, but it's trying to be helpful and not throw up on you every time you make a mistake. I'm of the thought or opinion that it probably should. Yeah, and it should give you one of those big fat errors. Hey dude, You got a binding problem in this page, go fix it. Oh, by the way, here's your base exception that has your information you're after on it. But if we're nesting exceptions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is very important from a code tracking your stack trace for it, very, very important. It's still a pain to go through the evaluator for it. That's why I like exception, get base exception call. Brings us down to the bottom when it goes, but I'm not always going to be calling that inside my code. You could probably do that in the immediate window or something. But that gives you at least some idea there. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Do you ever, when you're looking at third-party things like this, do you ever look at like how complex your project is and then go, is it going to actually be time savings for me, or am I going to be buried in some little, you know, and have to back it all the way out and redo it the way I maybe should have done it? I don't know. I'm just wondering how you handle that, because I look at that and I go, oh man, I could build it out all the way and it saves me so much time, but then I might have one problem that costs me all the time I saved.
Well, generally, here's how I came to MVVM. We'll try to answer that the roundabout way. The current client that I'm on was actually, they've already purchased mobile applications for what they do. It's a credit union support system. And they wanted to determine how hard would it be to take all of their C# developers and expertise and bring the mobile development in-house. So I was on a few-month project to help establish that particular capability. And one of the things that we had to do was, okay, well, what framework should we use? You know, again, at the start of this project, I'm like, well, we could just do Xamarin.Forms MVVM. Okay, so I learned something since then. Again, that would be the case of, oh, I have to back this stuff all out. But what happened is I did actually evaluate 4 different packages. I did take a look at MVVMNano, FreshMVVM, MVVM Cross, the latest version, as well as Prism. And what I found is that they're all actually very experienced, very serious developers that have learned from other tool sets and grown along the way, and all would actually do what you want to do for the most part. So I had to get really nitpicky about deciding which one was which. And I was given like a time box of 4 to 6 hours to evaluate each one, write a report, feed it to another developer, explain my results, and then between the two of us, me and the client developer, came to a conclusion and decision. And ultimately, from what I was looking at, what did the bare necessity of what I needed to do quickest and easiest? Because remember, I was time boxed in the evaluation, didn't have the luxury of doing an entire project. So I had to kind of quick guess. So anything that started off being incredibly difficult to set up and go in the first place. Prism, for example, is supposed to be very good, very powerful, but when I was diving into it, I'm like, set this up, follow the instructions, they're not working, the interface, the example, and the code, they're not the same. It's like their documentation didn't evolve with the product. And I'm like, okay, there's a support issue. Okay, that's a black mark. Neat thing though about Prism and MVVM Cross, by the way, is that it will work with platforms other than Xamarin.Forms. So if you need a case where you need an MVVM framework that'll do a Windows app, perhaps a web app, and Xamarin.Forms, because you want to reuse your view model layer to support all of those things, FreshMVVM is not going to work for you because it only supports Xamarin.Forms platforms. Something to bear in mind as you make a decision. You know, so the case of, you know, we need to know what you need to have out of your framework. So we're going to go iOS and Android and maybe Windows. Okay, make sure that whatever you pick at least ostensibly covers all the platforms.
And Ridland is still working actively on FreshMVVM.
Thank you. That was the next part of why I picked it, is that an active developer who eats his own dog food. He just came out with another tool called Fresh Essentials, which I'm just going to look into a bit, but he is actively doing what he's got. He uses the code that he wrote. It's not like he wrote something and said, oh, this is for you, it's not for me. And then I'll get bored with it because I don't use it, right? We've seen cases like that. Stuart Lodge was great doing all of his stuff going on, but then I think he got done with it and said, well, I'm doing Java now, so I'm just going to go let someone else carry this thing I started and go on. Thomas Zaleski, I believe, did some more work on it. Cheeseburger Baron or something like that?
Oh, yeah, Cheese Baron.
Cheese Baron, that's it. And so, great guy, really smart. They did a lot of work to bring MVVM Cross to get rid of all the extra overhead that it didn't need with Xamarin.Forms in place. Problem is, it's been around so long and so many iterations. I found one of the guys at Magenic wrote a beautiful 5-page blog on how to set up the new version of MVVM Cross. And I followed this thing, and got it going, did all the steps, and in the end it didn't work. Why? Because MVVM Cross had evolved again beyond what this blog had done. So I figured, well, I've worked with MVVM Cross on 2 earlier editions on 2 different enterprise applications. I like it and have a lot of respect for it. I'm pleased that it can do platforms other than Xamarin.Forms. But that lack of documentation or confusion in the community as to what the current way of doing it was going to take me several hours to sort out before I actually started really coding anything with it. And I kind of said, okay, I'm not the guy who's got to use it. I've got to give it to somebody who's brand new to Xamarin and say, here, use this. Go figure it out. Did not seem like a very good recommendation to make. So I stuck with the quick to support, quick to go, and that left me with MVVMNano and FreshMVVM. Choice between the 2 is they're both active, they both got some good developer support, some good thought processes going behind it, but as far as the ecosystem around it, Fresh was a little bit bigger. And again, a lot of these are very nitpicky reasons to reject or accept something, but when you time box and everything is probably going to do what you need, that's the level you get to go down to pick and choose. Go ahead.
Did you compare not using MVVM at all to just what they come out with out of the box? Do you feel handicapped at that point?
It depends on what your needs are for your application. So basically, what?
Oh, no, I kicked him.
Oh, you kicked him. Okay, so he has a question, you kicked him. Okay, that's the other question. Okay.
I think you do testing.
The unit, there is none.
For small applications, yeah, okay.
Right. So if the case is, Xamarin.Forms does a lot of great stuff with its combined right to an abstract UI, develop, implement it. It's got all of the events and supports and powered C# behind it for more of a Windows perspective versus like a web look and feel, as far as how the navigation and postbacks and stuff work. The best part with that is, if that's all you need. Because when I was doing the sample application, that little, those were there when we were doing the drawing for the business license. I'd written a very quick glorified number generator. And I used it using the Xamarin MVVM Pattern. Of course, since it was my own utility app, I wasn't going to write unit tests, Yeah, I probably should, so I can use it as a show-off app if anyone ever needs me to say, show me something you've done. Here, it's mine. As opposed to, well, I copied this from somebody else and I made it compile. The first is a much more compelling story. So, for that reason, again, if you got to demo something to somebody, you want to show off enterprise-level coding practices, you're going to want to look at a framework because you want the dependency injection. You want the unit testing. Just from the standpoint of, even if you never actually do it, because every enterprise project I've been on, they do unit tests, but they always say, code everything first, and then while it's an acceptance testing, we'll write unit tests for it. Anyone been there? Okay, we're all been there. I've been there. I've been there pretty much every time. And every time you bring it up and say, we should do the unit test as we write each story or finish each feature, and we just cover a small set for those. That's great. At the start of the project, it's really, really, really good. But, long-term business projects, you've got BAs, people who don't always know the details of what they want until they're 2/3 into the project. Famous quote, I heard this from a BA type person. John, I can't tell you what a wheel looks like. I can only tell you if I don't think it's round enough. And you want me to build you a client invoicing system. So those are the kind of things that you're going to run into. But then timing always gets compressed. Just like QA, unit testing has a tendency to get thrown out at the end of, oh, we'll do it later, but later never comes. I think we're probably out of time going over. Thank you very much.
So I just want to say, if anybody would like some Xamarin swag, we still have plenty. Monkeys and other goodies. So please come to the box of Xamarin.
The box of joy. There you go.
Lots of goodies. And again, big thank you to Object Partners and also our sponsor Lauren, Mobile Composer. So thank you. And John, awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
And
Anyone going to evolve who wants to exchange numbers?
Someday I'll